Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
My guest today has been named the official music ambassador for Macon, Georgia. Since Macon has produced such stars as Little Richard, Otis Redding, the Allman Brothers, and Jason Aldean, just to name a few, that title is saying something. He's the owner of Shadow Sound Studio, a state-of-the-art professional studio sitting right dab in the heart of town. One star has labeled him the best ear in the music business. Besides his sound engineering expertise, he is an award-winning guitarist, songwriter, singer, composer, radio and television personality, college lecturer, teacher, and columnist. His talent is off the charts. His resume includes working with such people as Carole King, Phil Collins, Greg Allman, Taylor Swift, Rascal Flatts, and Chuck Leavell. And his band is open for Ted Nugent, Bad Company, Trisha Yearwood, and James Brown. And there are many more names. He's even a voting member of the Grammys. Oh, there's another thing I failed to mention. He's 100% blind. He has never seen the light of day. But he has a gift of shedding light. And if you hang on to his story, he will shine some your way today. As always, thank you for listening. This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I have my friend Joey Stuckey as my guest today. I first met him, Joey, I don't know. I think it was probably 10 years or a dozen years ago. Joey produced a CD for me, and he filled his studio up with a studio audience, and I stood there and talked for an hour, and he produced it. It got out on the internet. I was so blown away by Joey, and obviously I was around him for several days as we were getting ready and doing all that. This studio he has, I think Joey is called Shadow Sound Studio. Is that right? Is that
you got it? That's right. Yeah.
So it's a state-of-the-art and studio, and this huge mixer board, all these equipment. Joey's plugging stuff in. He's moving all these knobs that I knew nothing about, and he is blind. And I was sitting there with my mouth open. How in the heck is he doing this? I mean, how do you know what plug to plug? And it was just incredible to watch. And so Joey and I made a connection. I was very impressed. And in my association with him, I began to understand his own musical talents. When I first met him, it was just, Joey, it was just for you to produce my CD, but I didn't know that you were the official music ambassador for Macon, Georgia, and you'd rub shoulders with the biggest talents in the world in music. You're a songwriter and a singer and a composer and a television personality and a teacher in college and a columnist. And besides being the sound engineer, you're so much more. And then on top of that, Joey, I'm going to give you the microphone in just a minute. but on top of that, his wife, Jennifer, she birthed, I think, 4 of my grandkids, maybe 3 of the 4. I'm not sure if she was still around when the last one was born, but she is a certified midwife. Got really connected with the Stuckey family. They're great people. I've met Joey's mom and dad. They're wonderful people. They've got pictures all over that studio of every political powerhouse you've ever known. Joey's daddy was certainly friends with those. So, Joey, thank you so much for being here today. I know people are going to be spellbound with your story and how you live life despite the cards you were given. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, my friend. It's just good to get a chance to chat with you again. It's been too long.
Let's start talking about your childhood and I think you had a brain tumor, right? Just talk about
Right.
what happened and how that came about.
Yeah. So it was, just back in the dark ages of medicine, which was the 70s. My mom and dad, I want to just say, they are such incredible people, so smart, just did so many things that really weren't being done at the time. My mom, before it was fashionable and popular, my mom was always playing music to me, even though I was still in the womb. I mean, she was always thinking about she'll tell you that one of her biggest goals in life was to be a mom. That's something she felt called to be.
Right.
And my dad was a huge political mover and shaker, and they both really, once they realized I had some health issues, they just did things that were incredible and fought for my education and fought for me to have a place in society. So, but basically, when I was about 18 months old, my mom told the doctor, my pediatrician and everything, that she felt like something was a little off with me, that I seemed to have trouble navigating, and I didn't seem to be able to track her movements as well. And she just had a feeling that I wasn't quite doing all the things that an 18-month-old baby should. The doctors were like, you're an overprotective mother, go home, bake cookies, that there's nothing wrong here. A few short months later, my dad had walked with me and had me by the hand, and he let go of my hand, and I took a few steps forward and fell down a flight of almost 30 stairs. My parents were freaked out and scared, and didn't. So they rushed me to the hospital. The doctor's like, "Oh, I don't think this kid can see."
Was this in Macon?
No, this was back when I lived in Florida.
Okay.
I lived in Florida until I was 15 years old.
Okay.
So I'm originally from Green Cove Springs, Florida, and then lived in Jacksonville, Florida since I was about 7. They did some tests, and they discovered that the reason that I was blind was because I had a brain tumor. Now, the brain tumor essentially was benign. So in other words, it was not a cancerous tumor, but the issue with it was that it was growing at such a rapid rate that it was quite literally crushing things inside the brain. It was destroying things because it was moving so fast, growing so big. And so it destroyed my optic nerves, which is, the reason my eyes don't work. That's why a lot of people, when they see me, they'll say things like, well, you don't look blind. Well, the reason for that is externally my eyes are fine. But the wiring connecting my eyes to my brain is what doesn't work. And honestly, the blind part is difficult. I'm not going to say it's not. It is difficult. There are moments of extreme frustration. I'm not ashamed to admit that.
Well, I can't imagine.
But mainly, driving and reading are the two big ones. So that's why I'm all about driverless cars. I
bet that's coming. Yeah, that's coming.
It is coming. That's a rabbit hole I could get down. I'm so fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by the ethical and moral questions about it. But the thing that's harder to see and harder to understand really is what happened besides the blindness, which is that I have no endocrine system, and that's a bit tricky. So that means that I have no thyroid, I have no adrenal function. So all the glandular functions that are regulated by your endocrine system have to be controlled with medication for me. So I'm not a sick person. In other words, I'm not treating anything therapeutically, but I am replacing things that my body doesn't create on its own.
Yeah, I didn't realize the endocrine situation.
My schedule is wacky being in the entertainment business. So there was a time when I was doing TV shows and I had to be ready to rock and be, up and at 'em and happy and ready to go by, about 7 o'clock in the morning. So what I'd have to do, for example, was get up at 4 in the morning so that I would have time to get all my medicines in me. And because when I first wake up, Bruce, I mean, I feel like I've been run over by a truck. I mean, I don't feel well. I'm woozy. I'm weak. And it's just because, I got to take my medicine. And so I give myself time to acclimate to that. I have to very carefully plan my life so that I'm able to function. I just have to be very protective of my sleep. I have to make sure I get enough rest. I have to make sure I take my medicine on time. I have to make sure I eat on a regular schedule. I have to make sure I stay well hydrated. And, for example, if I let's say I work a 12 or 14-hour day, which happens all the time, if you get tired, your body says, hey, man, you're tired. How about some adrenaline? And your adrenal glands spread out some adrenaline. I have to regulate my system through medication. Well, ideally, what would happen is you'd have biofeedback. Your body would say, hey, you need more adrenaline, and then your body would make more adrenaline. That doesn't happen. So I have to, about every 3 months roughly, go through a full physical. And they try to regulate my medicines with blood work, but that is imperfect. So I just have to really be careful with protecting my energy and protecting, just making sure I do, I don't do anything foolish.
Right.
So it's tricky. So the brain, and then later in life, the brain tumor caught me by total surprise. And I don't know if the doctors decided that they weren't going to tell me I might have these issues later in life because they're like, hey, this kid's been through enough, or if they didn't know back in the day. But one of the things that turns out is not super uncommon is for someone with my particular type of brain tumor to develop issues with their joints later in life. And so I have a full metal hip that I got when I was like 28 years old, which is pretty young. And there's a whole struggle with that, of finding a doctor that would do it, because they're all like, man, you need to wait until you're in your 50s at least before we replace your hip, because if we do it this young, you're going to have it done again.
Right.
And my position on that was, I understand what you're saying, and I'm not excited about it, but the fact is, I'm in a wheelchair, and I want out of this chair, and I have to live life now. I can't worry about 20 years down the road. I have to live now.
You live intentionally, and
yes,
you have
yes.
leveraged the cards you've been dealt. You've leveraged them to do very well and to inspire other people. And I know you have a message. I think I'm right. You're 100% blind, right, Joe? You've never seen
That's right.
anything, right?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, and so there's so many questions. But before we get to the lesson in this, and I know you live intentionally, I want to talk about your wife, Jennifer. She had to have been a gift from God for you.
It's a beautiful story. I know you're a man of faith, as am I. I really can't explain us getting together any other way than divine intervention, frankly. I will tell you that I had some issues dating as far as long-term relationships, because several of the girls I dated decided they didn't want to be tied down to a blind person. They were afraid that they would have to take care of me all their life and all that kind of stuff. And the fact of the matter is, everybody needs help. Right. And I do need some assistance from time to time, but I'm not someone that says, I'm blind, get me something to drink, I'll sit here on the sofa. Well, I want to be as independent and do as much for myself as reasonable and safe. But I had this amazing thing happen. I met this lady, her name is Lee McWilliams, and she is a nurse. And she was, her hobby was playing piano in a Christian rock band. And so they were recording at my studio. And Lee's one of these people, Bruce. It's just like when you and I first met. We were instantly friends, and right. I just knew you were a special person. And Lee's one of those people too. She's just so lovely, just a lovely spirit, so kind and sweet. And I honestly felt led to say to her, hey, Lee, I've got a thing for nurses. and if you could hook me up with one, I will give you a studio discount. And I said it kind of tongue in cheek, but the fact of the matter is, I really felt in my mind, this light bulb went off, and I said, Lee is so sweet, and she attracts such sweet people to be around her. I bet she knows a nice young lady. And so about a week later, I had my wife's phone number. And so I called her around 6:30 in the evening, and we talked for close to 12 hours straight. And we didn't realize what time it was until her alarm went off. And she was like, oh, God, I got to go to work. But I was trying to be cautious. And, I was like, and I said, well, it's been such a joy talking to you. And boy, I'd love to get together, maybe next weekend or something, we can get together. And I was trying to play it cool. And she called me back later on that day. I called her on a Thursday night. But that Friday afternoon, she called me back and said, next week is not going to work for me. How about tomorrow? And literally, we have not been separated since. I honestly almost didn't call her. because, first of all, I'm blind, and I thought, okay, that's strike one. And then I'm a musician. Typically, that's strike two. And then I'm in a wheelchair. I was like, well, that's strike three. And I said, I have no chance with this woman. But then I thought to myself, what's the worst that can happen?
Right.
And the worst that can happen is we've been married, 19 years?
You guys were meant to be together, and I can't
I
imagine.
agree.
I can't imagine how you would be doing all that you do without her too. Your parents, but
Yeah.
I saw her. I mean, when I was around you, she was there. She was very involved, and I know she was also busy. So let me just ask you a crazy question. You've never seen, so you have to imagine what stuff looks like or what people look like. How does just give me a little bit of insight into how that is.
That's a really interesting question. And what's funny is when you read in books and you see on TV, you see a lot of blind people feeling people's faces, And I mean, maybe that works for some blind people. It doesn't work for me. All I feel is a skull. Right. So, which is not particularly attractive. I mean, it's just not one of those things. Honestly, one of the ways I know the most about a person, and this sounds kind of weird, but one of the ways I know most about a person is by feeling their hands. Wow. I learned so much about a person's character by the way their hands feel. I was raised from a little child to stick out my hand and say, "Hi, I'm Joey Stuckey. Nice to meet you." And I don't know if it's because of that, and I've shaken so many hands. And my parents, one of the mantras my parents had was, "You will never be left alone. You're going to see as much as the world." And I use the common vernacular see, even though I don't. But you're going to experience or see as much of the world as there is out there to experience. And so I don't know if it's because of those experiences, but I just can tell so much about people's hands. So one of the things I noticed about Jennifer's hands is what kind hands they were. And they were the hands of a healer, just a sweet soul. And so that's one thing. I can tell a lot by somebody's voice, not so much the timbre of the voice, but the way in which they speak, the way they emphasize certain words. Language is important. Mm-hmm. And the words that people choose to use tells you a lot about how their mind works. So there's that. Now, there is, of course, when we talk about attractiveness and, having you think your wife is beautiful, and I do. If they look good, they tend to feel good. So I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. This is a family show, but but let's just say there's a reason I'm a hugger. I tend to hug everybody. That's just how I was raised. And I've got friends that are not huggers, and yet they hug me, and they do it without bashfulness or without resentment, because it's just a natural way I express my affection for people. And the truth of the matter is, I don't let people into my life that shouldn't be hugged anyway. People oftentimes will look in a mirror, and some people practice facial expressions, and they practice smiling and all this stuff. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But my point is that people tend to, sight is a very powerful sense, and it tends to dominate of the five senses. It tends to dominate how people perceive the universe. Hearing and smell and stuff like that tend to come secondary for most people. And that's because the way I think about it is sight takes up a lot of bandwidth. So the way I explain this, a lot of my students, when I teach, have this question about, seeing and not seeing and all this stuff and how I perceive things. And so, one of the things I tell them is like, check it out. If you've got your cell phone, your smartphone, as they call them these days, if you've got your smartphone and you've got 10 apps open, it's going to run pretty sluggishly. If you've got one app open, that app's going to run pretty fast. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to my hearing and my sense of touch, essentially, the brain tumor also took my sight, but it took my sense of smell as well. So I am essentially a walking set of ears and hands. It's not that my ears physiologically are somehow better. It's just that I process that information very thoroughly, and I don't have anything else distracting me from what I like to think of as critical listening skill.
Tell me what came first, the engineering, or I assume your music ability came first, right? You started playing music, and how did you become the accomplished sound engineer? Kind of put that together for me.
Well, that's a great question. So the fact is that music was always a critical part of my life. As I said earlier, my mom was playing sounds to me before I was born. And she just, she played classical music. My mother had a deep love of classical music and what in college we called sacred music, but basically the Baptist hymnal.
Right.
She loved gospel music, hymns. Her dad was a Baptist minister, so she used to sing in church and all that kind of stuff. And then she loved classical music and always loved opera. And then my dad played country music in a band when he was a teenager and even continued to do it, all throughout his life. Now, he never did it for a living, but so music was always a huge part of my life, but I didn't really start playing music first, which is interesting. I always found music a great source of inspiration, a great source of comfort, a great source of entertainment. But honestly, my early life was really focused on survival because I almost died a couple times, and it just really was, I had to focus on just getting through what I had to get through and living as much of a normal childhood as possible. So my sound engineering actually came first. And so what happened was I was 13 years old. I had a really bad case of pneumonia, and the medicine they gave me to clear up the pneumonia helped me to breathe, but I started throwing up blood because I was allergic to the medicine. So it was pretty dicey. And I had to basically lay in bed for 4 months, at home. I was homeschooled for a little part of that. And then the rest of the time was over the summer, which was handy. I was pretty miserable, frankly, and felt terrible. But I discovered on public radio that they were playing these old radio shows from the 50s and the 60s. A lot of people may not know that before television, we had the same kind of programming, the Lone Ranger, cop shows and dramas and soap operas. Those were all on radio first. For a blind child, radio shows were just an epiphany for me because the story was told not with visuals, but with music, sound effects, and dialogue. And all of a sudden, I said, man, I could do this. I could record this kind of thing. Canada and the UK still do a lot of radio shows. That's still a viable entertainment for them. Here in the US, we don't do that. There's very few.
Right.
But so I wasn't really. So at first I was thinking about, God, wouldn't it be great to do some radio shows and be on public radio? But later, as I sort of looked into that, I realized that I could do it for film or television. And I thought, God, who better than a blind guy to record, to tell you what sounds realistic and what doesn't? And so my parents bought me some very cheap equipment from Radio Shack. I don't know if your listeners will remember Radio Shack or not. But
I remember for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I loved it as a kid. It was great. And so they bought me a couple of microphones and a little mixer. And I started basically applying the scientific method. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And I would find sounds that I wanted to record, and I'd play around with how far away I put the microphone and where did I put it and all this kind of stuff. And then, having never met a stranger, I called up the DJ at the public radio station that was playing these shows. He was playing them from midnight to 3 a.m. every Saturday. And I called him up and said, hey, man, thank you for playing this stuff. This is so exciting. I told him I'm a blind guy, and this has opened up a whole new world for me. Well, he became a friend of mine. He came over and taught me what he knew about sound recording. And interestingly, the way this all connects, I then moved to Macon, Georgia. I moved to Macon when I was 15. I still stayed in touch with this DJ friend. His name's Rob Thomas. Rob knew the head of the planetarium at our local museum here. And they were on the phone. Now, Rob's in Jacksonville, Florida, and the planetarium's here in Macon, Georgia. And they were on the phone together. And the head of the planetarium was like, our sound here is just terrible. I just wish we had better sound and someone that was dedicated to working on sound. And he said, I know this kid that's pretty sharp. You ought to call him and have him come be your sound technician. I bet he'd love it. And they did. And that was my first job. And then what happened from there that has basically shaped the rest of my life was I was, 15 years old. Most of the other people that were close to my age were, 18 to 20, somewhere in that range, working at the museum. And a lot of them were artistically inclined and had, garage bands. And they said, hey, we understand you've got some recording equipment home in your attic. I was like, yeah. And they're like, well, can my band come record a demo? We need to make a demo. Sure, you can come record a demo. And that's how my studio business started. By the time I was 19, I had moved to downtown Macon and had my own place and moved out of my attic. And that's the career. And I have to say, one of the reasons that I chose that path of having a studio was I was really worried at the time about, driving and how would I get from a place A to place B and, all this stuff.
Sure.
And, as a teenager, you're not real excited about the idea of your parents driving you places. I mean,
Right.
don't get me wrong. I'll take what I can get. But I said to myself, what is the way to make people come to me rather than me having to come to people? And I thought, God, a studio just makes so much sense. I've always had a bit of an encyclopedic knowledge of music. And I've always been exposed to multiple genres, from jazz to hip hop to rock to whatever, classical and country and all that. So this one garage band came in and recorded a song. And I said, wow, guys, that's a great song. I don't know that song or the artist, which is kind of a surprise. Whose song is that? Because most of the bands were recording what we call cover material, which means they're recording somebody else's song. And they said, oh, we wrote that. And that's when the second sort of watershed moment happened for me, because I realized that I had things I wanted to say and that music could be the vehicle through which I told the stories I wanted to tell. So that's when I really said, okay, I need to be a musician.
You worked with some famous people as a sound engineer and as a musician, right? I've seen like Carole King and Phil Collins and Greg Allman and Taylor Swift. And it goes on and on. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. People say, how do I become successful? Of course, success is kind of a nebulous term in my mind, because success is defined differently by different people. But the way to be successful is to be where music is being made, to be where things are happening. So, a couple of cool things, like, Carole King, I ran live sound for her, and she was absolute just charming and wonderful, and that was a lot of fun. And that was during the time that John Kerry was running for president. She was out stumping for him, and so I ran sound for her. And then, Greg Allman, I had met several times in social occasions, and actually his last album I was slated to do, which was produced by Don Was, who's a fantastic producer. But I had been slated to do the vocal recording for him, and then he passed away. We were going to cut all his vocals at my studio. They'd recorded the instrumentation somewhere else. I can't remember where. I think at Muscle Shoals, but I might be wrong about that. Don't hold me to it, because of the historical vibe of that. And that's, Greg Allman, before he became synonymous with Macon, Georgia, they were really, when they were the Almond Joys, they were really in the Muscle Shoals area and doing a lot of stuff in Muscle Shoals. He was always super nice to me and very kind. So, and then you do one project for someone, and then somebody else hears it and says, wow, I want that guy to work on my record. One of my favorite things is getting to work with some of the Southern legends that made Macon, Georgia and Middle Georgia the place it is for music. So Chuck Leavell, who of course is Eric Clapton and Rolling Stones. I've done a live concert recording with him, and my very good friend Randall Bramlett, who played with Greg Allman and Traffic and Sea Level and Steve Winwood, and had a couple of his songs recorded by Bonnie Raitt. Randall's absolutely just fan, and he's a big artist in his own right too. But I've recorded some stuff with him for him before, a live album with him. But I also have had him as a guest musician on a bunch of my songs. And then one of the coolest things, working with Jimmy Hall of Wet Willie, and Jimmy Hall currently is the singer with Jeff Beck Band and has played with Hank Williams Jr. And Jimmy and I have done a lot of stuff together, and those mean so much to me because of the influence they've had on me as a young person growing up with the sounds of Macon ringing in my ears. That was always exciting. But I've also played with Ted Nugent, played with Bad Company. We played with Smash Mouth, B-52s, Trisha Yearwood. There's a huge list. From the jazz world, I played with Ben Tucker, who was a Savannah native, but he...
When you say you played with them,
shared the stage with a lot of them in a live setting, and one of my favorite memories is working with Sir Alan Parsons. Now, Alan, he was a recording engineer with the Beatles. He was the producer for Dark Side of the Moon for Pink Floyd. Of course, he had the Alan Parsons Project, and it's been a really great honor to get to know him, to learn from him, to work beside him in the studio, and to be of some minor assistance. When he recorded his last album, I got a chance to help out with that, and I was responsible for riding shotgun on the flutes with the orchestra, because being blind, I'm really picky about pitch. I just sort of stayed with the flutes and was, telling them that they sharp or flat or whatever, and doing some things like just little things. Also, I was their human measure keeper. They had this huge score with this 40-piece orchestra, and I was sitting there, and they were like, "Now, where do we make that mistake? Where do we need to go back and fix it?" And I'd say, "Start rolling at measure 13, punch in at measure 16, be out by measure 21." And they're like, "How do you know that?" And I'm like, "Well, I could give you a bunch of fancy answers, but the truth is I have to, or I can't do my job because I can't see." So he really enjoyed using me to do things like that. And I celebrate something called a Live Day every year. It is the celebration of when my brain tumor was successfully removed. And I've always celebrated that day since I was a little kid, because that was one of the ways my parents made me think about the affirmational rather than the traumatic. Since 2017, we've done these big free family-friendly concerts in Macon, celebrating a Live Day, and just put on a day of music where people can come together and just joy, just revel in the joy of life and music and connecting with their neighbors and being a community. Alan Parsons, in I think it was 2020, sent me an Alive Day message to say, happy Alive Day. And he said, and I have it on video so I can prove it, just in case you don't know, Joey Stuckey has the best ears in the music industry.
How about that? I believe him.
Well, I'm not saying it's true, but I'm not going to argue with Sir Alan Parsons.
Really? I wouldn't either. I've turned the TV on. I've seen you. I think I was maybe watching the Music Hall of Fame thing. What you were performing there one time, weren't you?
That's right.
Yeah.
We had that was a fantastic experience. That was one of the best TV shows I'd ever done, and it was there was about 3,000 people in the audience, and then roughly, I think they said around 3 million viewers watched that broadcast. And it was interesting because
I was one of them.
It was interesting because it was one of the first major live TV shows I'd ever done. And the funny thing about that show, Bruce, I am a bit of a taskmaster when it comes to preparing for a performance. I rehearse relentlessly. And the reason for that is because you never know what's going to happen, and you need to be prepared. So we got on stage. We had a great sound check. We came back about 6 o'clock that night to go on about, I think we got on about 9:30 or 10. And when we got back on to do our set on the live TV show, we had no monitors. So we could not hear anything. The only thing I could hear was the drummer, basically.
How do you even do that?
Well, it's not easy, but that relentless rehearsal paid off, and nobody knew that we couldn't. At the end of the show, people comment on, I had this huge smile as we end the song, and people comment like, "Oh, you look like you have so much fun." It's like, no, that smile was a smile of relief that we made it through and we couldn't hear a thing.
Incredible. And I remember watching it, and I certainly didn't know all that. I was very impressed. You still have your band, right?
My first band, when we were playing with Ted Nugent and all that stuff at Lakewood Amphitheater and stadiums and stuff like that with those guys, the first band had 2 drummers, an auxiliary percussionist, 2 guitars, vocal, bass, keys, saxophone. It was a huge band. And that kind of band is really hard to keep together, because not only do you have tons of different schedules to try and compensate for, but it's hard to find places that can hold you all, everybody. and it's hard to find places that want to pay you enough for everybody to come out. So today, my model is a little different than it used to be. So I have 3 different groups that I run. They're all just under my name. So I just go under Joey Stuckey, and sometimes I'll perform just guitar and vocal, and I've toured all over the United States and the UK doing just that, and that's great. Then I have what I consider my guerrilla operations, guerrilla music warfare team, and that's my little trio, which is guitar and vocal, which is what I do, drums and bass, and we play what we're calling progressive Americana, which basically means a little country, a little blues, a little rock, and so that group can play, just about anywhere because it's a small group of guys. And then I have my jazz quartet that I run, and that has my keyboard player, and he actually plays bass samples with his left hand and piano parts with his right hand. And then I have my drummer and my sax player, and then myself and guitar and vocal. So I run 3, and that band typically that band only does like corporate gigs, for big conventions and stuff like that, or sometimes festivals. We tend not to do clubs and stuff like that. Whereas the trio group plays anywhere they want us.
Right.
And of course, and again, it really has more to do with finding that, making sure I can pay everybody what we need to do it. And also a place that can fit everybody. But with just 3 of us, or with just me and the guitar, I can just about play anywhere.
But Joey, I know that I'm going to give your website out before we get off of here, and I know people will want to read, as you've got a lot of information on it. You can read the stuff he's doing, stuff he's done. There's a lot of information, very professionally done. But let me ask you a couple of questions, because I want people to hear this. What do you consider your biggest accomplishment in life?
My favorite thing is to get a chance to hear someone else's story and to share mine. And I do that through a number of different vehicles. So part of that is through teaching, and I do a lot of master classes. I travel all over the United States and even to Europe and do master classes in sound engineering, music business, things like that. The art of improvisation is another thing that I talk about as a musician. So I do that. I also do inspirational talks, churches, civic groups, colleges, wherever they want to have me. And I have what I call my 4 pillars of success talk that I talk about. And then I do it, one-on-one when we have concerts. So one of the things that I realized was that I really want, when I'm no longer here on this plane, what I want to leave is the world just a little bit better than I found it. I think that's a worthwhile goal. And I am willing to do it one person at a time, one song at a time, because I think music has an amazing power of healing. And I have a story about one night when I was really frustrated. I was running 102 fever. My voice was about shot. The guitar player that was playing with me at that time, I still had 2 guitar players, me and this other guy. He had double booked himself, and at the last minute said, "Hey, I forgot I committed to somebody else, and since they're paying me a little bit more, I'm going to go to their show and not yours." and I said, "Yeah, but I booked you first. Shouldn't I get first call?" So, and then one of my guys that was playing with me at this little club, during one of our breaks, he had gone out and got intoxicated in an alley and gotten just drunk off it. So I had to send him home. So all that stuff was going on the same day. And I was just so frustrated. And so I was like, this is stupid. I don't want to do this anymore. I was about 22 years old, I think. I was like, this is so dumb. People are so crazy. I'm so disappointed. And then also I don't feel well. I'm sick as a dog. And at that time, I was like, oh, the show must go on whether I'm sick or not. I don't feel that way anymore. But at that time I did. And so I was really frustrated and thought, this is just a terrible idea. So I had another one of these moments where I just felt led to do something. And we have become a bit famous for our version of Whippin' Post, which is a classic song by the Allman Brothers.
Right.
And I've done some things to the arrangement and the way that I treat the arrangement that just really give it some energy and some real power. And so we were really famous for this song, and it's what we always close with, and it's a big crowd pleaser, and people just freak out when we do it. And so the band's like, okay, it's the last song, time to do whipping post. And I was like, I can't. My voice is not going to, because I do a bunch of vocal gymnastics on this song. And I said, my voice is not up to it. I'm burnt. And they're like, well, we got to close with a song. I said, yeah, tonight we're going to close on Amazing Grace. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? You're crazy. This is a bar. Why would we play Amazing Grace? I was like, I don't know, but I'm the boss and we're doing it. and so
Love it.
It's not, my band is not a democracy. I figure if I pay all the bills and take all the risks, I should make the calls.
Absolutely.
So what happened was we did Amazing Grace and everybody thought I was an idiot. I got off stage. All I wanted to do, Bruce, all I wanted to do was go home and lay down and die. I just felt so bad. I just wanted to go. And I'm standing there waiting for somebody. I got off the stage by myself because it was only like an 1.5 inch step. But I was waiting for my mom or my dad or somebody to come get me and take me to where I could sit down while we packed up. I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, this woman flings her arms around me and starts crying. I didn't know what to do. So I just hugged her back and said, ma'am, are you okay? Is there something I can do for you? And she said to me, she related the story to me that they were from, oddly enough, Jacksonville, Florida. And they had come to Macon for her uncle's funeral. And he was a gospel singer. And the one thing that he wanted at his funeral was to make sure they sang Amazing Grace. Well, they didn't. And she had been upset all afternoon about his wishes not being honored. And so they had decided to come to the little restaurant that had music and stuff and get something to eat. And they thought about driving back to Jacksonville, Florida, which is about a 5-hour drive. They had thought about going back, but they said, no, let's go get something to eat and we'll stay in a hotel for the night. And once they heard the band play, they decided to stay and listen to us play. And then we played Amazing Grace. And she felt like everything was okay because her uncle's wish had been honored in that strange way. And it's the craziest story ever. If I hadn't lived through it, I wouldn't believe it myself. It's true. And it made me realize a profound truth is that if I can make one person's life a little better, what else do you really want? I mean, that to me is success. Now, I'm not saying that I don't want financial stability and I don't want to be able to buy that new guitar and I don't want to have a nice vacation. All those things are great. Nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, if I really can make a difference in somebody's life, I mean, I don't know what else you could want. And that is living a life of intention. To simply exist is not sufficient, at least to me.
The older you get, the more true that becomes. Life is about what you just said. It's not just physical limitations, but there are people listening to us who have limitations in their life. It could be It could be physical limitations. It could be all kind of things going on in their life. It could be somebody in their life that's limiting them.
Yes.
What is your advice to overcome limitations? You have done it.
It's a complex issue that we could spend an hour and a half talking about in a very nuanced way. But generally speaking, I think the most important thing you can do is be honest. What I mean by that is know who you are. Know who your authentic self is. Get rid of all the other external pulls on your time and attention and understand who your heart is, what your heart is. And so once you really accept who you are and what you are and give yourself grace to be imperfect, then everything starts to fall into place. I mean, for me, I had to accept the fact that I can't see. It's not always easy. I'm not going to say that it is. And I think that as an honest person, it's okay for me to be mad about that sometimes. It's okay for me to say that I'm frustrated. It's okay for me to say I'm angry, or why did this happen to me? Or wouldn't it be great if I could just drive? Those are fine things to feel. I think it's okay for us to feel what we feel. I don't think we should try and convince ourselves that we feel differently if we don't, because I don't think that helps. I think the honesty is super important. So that is why you can feel all those feelings. The key is not to be stuck there. At
Right.
some point, you have to get on with living.
One thing's
And
for
you have
sure, God allowed what happened.
Yeah,
God, and He has a purpose for all of us, and
absolutely.
and that's getting into that purpose and living life, whatever that is. You do impact other people. There's no telling how many people you've impacted that you don't even know about that just watch you. I remember watching you and just going home and having tears in my eyes. How does he do that? Just on the soundboard. I didn't know the musician you were and all that stuff at that point. But
Well, the beautiful thing, Bruce, is that when you're honest, when you are who you are supposed to be, and you're comfortable being that authentic you just by being you will bless other people, whether you know it or not. I had shoulder replacement surgery in 2018. I'll be honest, it was sheer hell. I had some real. I won't go into all the problems, but there were a lot of problems with it. I was very sick afterwards, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to come back. I'd had lots of setbacks before and always bounced back and managed to do, but I felt so bad and was having so many health struggles. I was just down in the dumps. And so one of my friends, when I finally got well enough to get out of the house, he said, "Come on, man, let's go out and have dinner." And he was a drummer in my band. I was like, "Man, I don't know. I don't feel well. I'm fatter than I've ever been because I'm so sick at my stomach from all the medicine that I'm on. The only thing I can eat is gingerbread cookies. Like that's the only thing that will stay down." I was like, "I'm fat. I'm miserable. Everything hurts." And he's like, "No, man, let's." He's like, "If you feel bad, we'll come home, but let's get out and just get you out of the house." I said, "Okay, we'll do it." So we walk into this restaurant, and I just felt terrible. I was like, "Man, I don't know. I shouldn't be here. I just feel bad." And this young lady in her early 20s, who was the hostess, said to me, "Hey, aren't you Joey Stuckey?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she's like, "Oh, wow, I'm so glad to see you." She said, "You're the reason that I am getting ready to graduate from music school as a flute player." I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, you came to my high school one year and performed and talked about, did your inspirational talk. And because of you, I had the courage to follow my heart and my dream to be a musician. I'm getting ready to graduate." And I just stood there in the middle of the restaurant and said, "Can you say that again?" Because I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
My point is, like, I didn't do anything unusual with her. I didn't spend any extra time with her. I didn't do anything except be who I was. And that was enough to give her what she needed. And in that moment, she didn't know it, but she gave me what I needed to get my strength back and to get myself set on the path of really recovery. You just have to be honestly who you are and not worry about whether anybody else understands, whether anybody else gets it. Honestly, most people, when you tell them you want to be a musician for a living, they think you're nuts.
Wow.
And look, it's a hard life. I ain't gonna lie, but it is tricky, and it's one of those things that in the music business, you're either broke or you're rich. The middle is hard to find. I'm in the middle. So the middle is hard to find, but it's, it can be done. Most of the times when people don't make it in whatever they're doing, it's because one of two reasons. Either they don't feel empowered to be who they are, or they're not willing to sacrifice the things they have to sacrifice to achieve the goal they want to set forth.
Uh-huh.
And that's okay. If you decide that it would be nice to be a rock star, but you don't want to put in all the work, no harm, no foul. But you shouldn't really be surprised then if you're not willing to put in the work and sacrifice the sacrifice. But my point is, just being who you are is honestly enough and will bless other people, whether you attend or not. And that's why no matter what kind of day I'm having, no matter what's going on in my life, I always try to be joyful because my attitude can be infectious. I can't tell you how many times someone just being sweet to me, say, "Have a nice day, sir," or "Be blessed, sir," at the Chick-fil-A or wherever I'm at, changes my whole outlook on the day.
Yep.
Whereas when somebody's really rude to me, that can change my whole outlook on the day. And the thing is, you don't know what people are going through chemo, or if their spouse just left them, or if a loved one you don't know.
That's true.
And so if you can just always be kind, that is absolutely a superpower.
You're listening to Joey Stuckey ladies and gentlemen, that is joeystuckey.com. Take a minute and go to his website. There's no way we can cover all that this man has done, what he's doing, the impact he has on others. Joey Stuckey, that's JoeyStuckey.com. Go check him out. Joey, thank you so much for
Bruce,
taking the time to doing this, man. I appreciate you.
I'm so glad to be part of it.
I appreciate it very much. Joey, we're going to go out by playing a bit of your version of the Allman Brothers' famous song, Whipping Post. Hold on to your seats, folks. You're listening to the music of Joey Stuckey.
I've been run down, I've been lied to, and I don't know why I let that mean old woman make me out a fool. Took all my money, wrecked my new car. Now she's out with one of my good time buddies and they're drinking some crosstown bar. Sometimes I feel, sometimes I feel like I've been turned to the whipping post, turned to the whipping post, turned to the whipping post. Good Lord, I feel like I'm dying. Now say, viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.